Some of you may have noticed, and some of you may not have cared, that over the past few years, you will notice on this channel that I've largely stayed away from any political content. And that has kind of been by design, admittedly. Because once you start wading into the wacky world of politics, you just kind of see the stupidity that is systemic throughout the entire spectrum of the United States political scene. And while I generally enjoy getting that type of heat from having everybody be mad at something that you say, it's almost like over the past 4 years it was going to be largely counterproductive to do so. Is it just your message is not going to get across, nobody's going to listen, everybody thinks they're right and they're usually wrong. Um, so there you go. But cannot deny that politics has certainly been on my mind for the past 4 years, certainly over the past few months, and during this week for sure. And now it appears we have some closure. I say that hesitatingly, but for the moment, it appears that we have closure as finally Pennsylvania has been called and Joe Biden has been elected as the 46th president of the United States. He now becomes the oldest first-term president in American history. So that's history in and of itself. You also have your first woman to be vice president in Kamala Harris, not to mention the first black woman, or you could say biracial woman, however you want to define her. So history was made, not to mention the fact, and the piece that I like the most is that turnout was incredibly high. Not only will Joe Biden receive the most votes of any candidate in history running for president, but even the loser, Donald Trump, will receive by far the most votes of any loser in presidential election history, and he will receive more votes than anybody that's not named Joe Biden in presidential history. Now, it's not the highest percentage overall turnout, but for me, looking at this and saying, I want people to vote regardless of what they believe because I want people to participate in the system and have their voices actually be heard. Like that, to me, is a positive. Some of the things over the past 4 years that may have led up to this moment in time that drove that high turnout might not be my favorite, but I appreciate that so many folks participated in this system. And look, I'm not going to entertain some of the foolishness talking about, it was a stolen election, it's a fraud. And that's loser talk. Like, that's exactly the type of talk you would expect from the ultimate in insecure, whiny crybabies like Donald J. Trump, period. And conservatives and GOP members can either focus on that crap and create some long-term problems for themselves down the road, or they can acknowledge and understand that this was an incredibly flawed incumbent. And the momentum just was not there, and he lost, whether you like it or not. Can't be surprised when early voting absentee ballots, mail-in ballots broke overwhelmingly for Biden in key states when Biden and his team were advocating for that, and Trump potentially scared away millions of his own voters in rural America by advocating election day voting and shooing them away from and scaring them away from mail-in voting. Like one of those things, you blame everybody else except the root cause of the problem, which is yourself. So sitting there trying to blame, it's a game, all these other things that are widely disproven is just about as dumb as when the Democrats 4 years ago were sitting there pissing and moaning about Russia. Oh, now you're mad about interference in an election, but when the U.S. has been doing it for God knows how many generations, it's not a problem. Now you're mad because Russia beat you to the game and they were better at it. The reality is Hillary didn't lose because of Russia or any fraud or anything else like that, other than maybe the fraud that is Donald Trump himself. Hillary lost because the system was rigged for her on the Democratic side. Wasserman Schultz made sure of that. That is a real scumbag. They made sure they rigged the game for her. She goes into this cycle in 2016 with a certain type of entitlement, like she's going to ride some Obama wave that would not exist for her, that may have existed for Joe, which is when the hell he should have run. We could have enjoyed not having 4 years of Trump to begin with if that would have happened. To then she goes on to run a terrible campaign with horrendous messaging, and Donald Trump won legitimately. Now this time, it is a chance for conservatives to either go down the wacky conspiracy, disconnected from reality point of view, or accept reality is that their guy lost. And while a lot of folks in this country are certainly probably celebrating right now that in 2.5 months, Joe Biden will be sworn in as the 46th president of the United States, Kamala Harris will be sworn in as, I think, the 49th vice president of the United States, and Donald Trump will no longer be the resident of 1600 Pennsylvania at the White House. I would caution the liberals and the Democrats and the Biden voters, the Biden supporters, that this is really not that much reason for celebration. It is not. When you look at historical precedents combined with the current reality that we were facing in terms of economic impacts, COVID-19 and everything else, this should have been a massive blue wave election, at least on the level of what happened with Barack Obama in 2008, where he won by an overwhelming majority when it came to both the popular vote and when you're talking about the Electoral College. And there were certainly downstream benefits for other Democrats on the ticket, both at the Senate and House levels. You know, it wasn't just that Obama won this historic campaign, this historic figure by a somewhat historic margin, you know, not the margin Trump tried to pretend in 2016 was historic, which is, ironically enough, probably going to be the margin that Biden wins by in 2020. But it was also the fact that Democrats took the Senate and got a supermajority out of it, grew their strength and power in the House. Like, that was a blue wave. 12 years later, in a similar, you know, different circumstances, yes, but similar type of environment, the Democrats should have been rolling to a blue wave. Like the fact that we had to wait until Sunday afternoon for the media to manipulate this, where they've been playing the game all along. You know that, because this race should have been called 2 damn days ago, because the math just wasn't there for Trump anymore. It was not there. And certainly should have been called on Friday night. The reality is Biden barely won. You can say he'll have maybe end up with 306 electoral votes. Like, it's a healthy victory, similar to Trump in 2016. But that's far from a landslide. That's far from a wave. The fact that you took a president, an incumbent, that had consistently greater than 50% in his unfavorable rating, when you have millions and millions of Americans that did not start off the year as unemployed, are now unemployed and continue to be unemployed, and you have a freaking health pandemic and COVID-19 running rapshot all over the country, and it still has not ceased. It is getting worse. Like, this should have been a damn near 400 electoral vote type of win for Joe Biden. He should have been winning by 400 something to 130 if he was any type of decent candidate with any type of message. Democrats and liberals basically united and said, hey, we got to help the country eat vegetables for the next 4 years by going with Sleepy Joe here. And you're damn lucky it actually worked out. Thanks to some of these folks like Stacey Abrams in Georgia and etc. and the turnout machine that they had in place in those blue districts, like, it made the difference. So let's not pretend that Joe won by some overwhelming margin because he was that great of a candidate. And when you really look at this, like, it's not a surprise to hear, you know, in the past couple of days, Nancy Pelosi's meeting with the Democratic caucus and saying that they need to stop running, you know, so far to the left, and some of these things such as the social justice riots and everything else created problems for Democrats, when nothing could be further from the truth. Like, here I live in Virginia in the 7th District, and Abigail Spanberger is the Democratic representative here, and she was in a tough election fight against Nick Freitas, the Republican. Nick Freitas has a very punchable face. Abigail Spanberger, if her message was any type of quality at all, should have beat him easily. She barely won. And the reason she barely won was because she was running this whole, like, I'm going to be uniting and I'm going to do bipartisan and I'm going to do all these things that just don't matter anymore. It's not the 90s anymore. You can't run on that Bill Clinton crap anymore. You're going to get plowed. Like, for a party like the Democrats, who like to tout their belief in science and intellect and logic and reason, god damn, when it comes to running elections, are they so freaking stupid. Stupid, stupid, stupid. Joe Biden runs this uniting, healing type of message, and he barely wins. Other Democrats try to get on board with that in House races and Senate races, and guess what? The Democrats are going to end up losing seats in the House. They're very likely, as I don't see how you're going to win both special elections in Georgia. They're going to end up with a minority still in the Senate. How the hell does that happen? When there should have been a sizable, significant blue wave. Instead, Biden has to struggle to get there. You couldn't even beat Susan Collins. For Christ's sakes, Tom Tillis. You couldn't beat these asshats. And you're losing several seats in the House? You'll still have the majority, but not as strong as you came into the 2020 election? The problem is that you ran too much to the center when nobody's in the center any damn more. Nobody cares. This is where I credit Donald Trump and the Republicans and the conservative establishment, conservative activists. They understand. It does not matter. That middle ground can kick rocks. Ultimately, people are going to, no matter what, even begrudgingly, fall on one side of the spectrum or the other. They know that to be true. And they went after their spectrum with a fervor and a passion that pays off. And even if you want to say, well, look what it did with Trump. It made him a one-term president. But look what happened in that one term with Trump. He got tax cuts for the rich done. You're now looking at a 6-3 conservative majority in the Supreme Court because he was able to nominate 3 Supreme Court justices in 4 years. Not all 4-year terms are designed the same. Like, that's because of conservative activism. That's because of conservative passions and going after what they believe in. And the folks like Mitch McConnell, who should have been fired them damn selves because they've been there way too long and they represent a significant problem in Washington, they continue to win by large margins, running obstructionist type of philosophies and approaches to their politics. And now you got the Democrats trying to come in and say, "Kumbaya, my Joe, kumbaya." And they barely won the White House. And you could argue with me the definition of barely or not, but to me it's barely. This should have been a blue wave, and a sizable blue wave. But instead of running on incredibly popular progressive policy ideas, such as the $15 minimum wage, which, by the way, Trump won Florida by a bigger margin here in 2020 than he won it in 2016. So you argue the state is shifting a little more red. All the while, the voters in Florida, by a 60+% vote, by over 60%, they voted in favor of a $15 minimum wage. Candidates in other races that ran on popular progressive ideas, such as Medicare for all, such as the $15 minimum wage, won the races. The ones that ran against it lost. Student loan debt cancellation, at least some degree of it. Popular ideas. Like, these are things that when candidates run against them in their local races and in their statewide races, they win. And when they run away from them on the Democratic side of the House, they lose. And yet you have idiots like the Nancy Chuck wing of the party that think that you want to run away from that. Ding dong, dumb dicks, you're heading in the wrong direction. It's not the Clinton Gingrich era anymore, you jackasses. There is nothing to celebrate here. This, if anything, speaks to the stupidity and the incompetence of the leadership of the Democratic Party that they did not get a massive blue wave in 2020 similar to the levels that Obama got in 2008. How the hell does that happen? Running crappy candidates with crappy messages, running against popular policies, such as marijuana legalization. Should at this point in time, I don't care which party embraces it, somebody embrace it, and it's going to pay off for them big at the ballot. Like, liberals and Democrats can't even get universally behind marijuana legalization. What happens when the Republican Party ultimately does and they end up scooping you on it? You're going to lose several million voters just doing that. Biden winning is no reason for celebration because you all know he's one term as a president. Might not even make it through the full term for all the hell we know. So you're setting yourself up now for Kamala to run against somebody in 2024, and God only knows who the conservatives and the GOP are going to trot out there, and whether or not that person, whether it's a Pence or it's a Donald Jr., who the heck knows? You're talking about something that'll be determined in the next 3 to 4 years. There's a very good chance that those folks are going to sit there and throw out somebody that can emotionally connect with their base. Is Kamala really going to be able to emotionally connect with her base? Like, here's the reality. When you think about presidential races, you can talk about policies and uniting, not dividing, and all that stuff, and you can pound it. The reality is Americans at their core are very unsophisticated when it comes to their voting practices, especially when it comes to the president of the United States. They vote off of two things. One, state of the economy. Two, who's the more charismatic speaker, who's the more charismatic candidate. Trump was more charismatic than Hillary Clinton. He won. Obama was more charismatic than Romney and McCain before him. Obama won. Bush won twice. He was more charismatic than John Kerry, certainly, and Al Gore, definitely. Clinton, you want to throw out Clinton, but you also had the factor of Ross Perot running as third party. But either way, both times, he was the most charismatic of the candidates. George H.W. Bush would never win a charisma contest except against Michael Dukakis. And he was also running off of the previous 8 years of Reagan, where Reagan was a very successful president, who, again, by the way, certainly the more charismatic candidate who is better able to emotionally connect with his voters. And you can go back and back. You can say that for Jimmy Carter in 76. You can say that for Nixon in 72 and 68. You can say that for LBJ in 64, JFK in 60, Ike in 52 and 56. Maybe, just maybe, the last time you could really think of the candidate that was able to emotionally connect to their voters or was more charismatic that lost, maybe it was Dewey, and I would even question that. The point I'm getting at here is you can't run these eat-your-vegetable candidates and expect to be successful. It only paid off this time because Trump was so incredibly unpopular. And because of those local and statewide operations to turn out the vote in these major urban and suburban areas in these swing states. That's the only reason Joe is going to be the 46th president of the United States. It's not because his message was unifying. It's not because his message resonated or worked. It didn't. It was because he was running against the other guy, and that can only carry you but so far. Only but so far. And these next 4 years, the gridlock's not going to get better. Hell, it might get worse because now the Republicans don't have the White House. What the hell are they going to do? Especially in the Senate. It could get ugly. And the reality is you're looking at now with a conservative run and owned Supreme Court, Obamacare certainly is at risk. Abortion rights are certainly at risk. Many other things that progressives and, liberals and even moderate people overwhelmingly support, all of those types of policies could be at risk when it comes to the Supreme Court. And that has everything to do with the Democratic establishment. It's their own damn fault. They've made this bed and now they have to lie in it. And everybody that supported Hillary in 2016 has to lay in their bed and own it and accept it. This is what you get. It's your fault. It is absolutely your fault. Do not sit there and just blame these Trump voters and say, well, they're all rednecks and they're hillbillies and they're racist and everything else. Surely, in a lot of cases, that applies, but it goes much deeper than that. If you're going to dismiss those people and not learn from them and incorporate it in your own way, then that's your ass and that's your problem. Period. That's exactly the reality. Because those voters are not going anywhere. Those voters are there. You got to figure out a way to combat that. And you don't combat that by running some dumbass type of kumbaya, unite us all type of approach and campaign messaging. It doesn't work. It didn't work here. The only reason Biden won is because Trump was that bad. That is no reason to celebrate other than you want to say, hey, I'm not going to have to deal with Trump's foolishness over the next 4 years. Okay, well, he might not be the president the next 4 years, but who knows with this delusional clown? He might run again in 2024. Furthermore, if it's not him, maybe it's Don Jr. that runs in 2024. Furthermore, we know the media and the networks absolutely fawn over this guy and love him to death because Donald Trump equals ratings. You really think the media, you really think these major networks wanted Donald Trump to lose this race? Hell no, they didn't. That's why they took so damn long to call it. Because they were trying to milk this shit for every single thing that it was worth. You think Trump is going to be totally out of the news in the next 4 years? It's very possible that he's out of the White House and he dominates the news cycle just as much as the other has. I just can't see a lot of reason for celebrating when in an election that should have been an overwhelming blue wave and potentially an even bigger blue wave than you got with 08 during Obama's run. I just can't see how that's a reason for celebration. Yeah, you got Trump out. Okay, again, he's just a representation of something. He's a manifestation of something. He is a symptom of something. He is not the something. He is not the problem with everything. He's just a form of it. Now you look at the fact that your House majority has shrunk. You couldn't even win there, which indicates that your messaging at these local district levels was absolutely atrocious and your candidates absolutely sucked. It also indicates your statewide races when it comes to the Senate. You're choosing bad candidates that run on really bad messages. Imagine somehow getting so delusional that you're going to dump almost $100 million into the Lincoln Project. You're dumping $100+ million into the races in Kentucky and South Carolina. How did that shit work out? How about the Democrats instead would have sat there and said, let's run a campaign contribution and let's provide clean drinking water to Flint, Michigan. You want to talk about something that would have carried a lot more weight and resonated a lot more, cost you a fraction of something, and you actually would have gotten a big win for the people and a big win in terms of optics and politically. There you go. Not dumping money into lame-ass Jamie Harrison and stupid-ass Amy McGrath's political campaigns. You had to know they had no chance. You had to know. You cannot counter extremism with moderation. Extremism gets emotion. Moderation does not. Humans by nature are emotional creatures. Americans specifically, when it comes to their voting, are not logical. They absolutely 100% will vote with their emotions. And when you look at this election, when you look at Donald Trump and the kind of coalition that he had, not only does it represent really a war of rural America versus urban and suburban America, but even more than that, the only demographics where, as a whole, Joe Biden picked up margin on Hillary Clinton from 2020 to 2016 was white men. He did not gain ground with white women. He did not gain ground with black men and black women. He did not gain ground with, I hate describing them as one monolith, but your Hispanic Latino votes. That there's so many racial components and other different things that are part of that. I hate when you lump them together, but for the purposes of this argument, as a whole, regardless, Joe is at the bottom of a 12-year thing from 2008 with Obama to 12 to 16 with Hillary and now 2020. You had more non-white voters vote for Donald Trump than any Republican candidate, probably going back to maybe 1960 with Nixon. That's a warning sign. So you're not winning the white working class rural voters, and you're losing more of the coalition that helped keep you in political relevance all of these years. That's not good. And that's not trying to blame, black and Hispanic voters, black and Latino voters for the election being this close. No, it's white people's fault at the end of the day because it's still the majority of the voting base. But beyond that, it comes down to the leadership of the Democratic Party not being connected with reality. So you're losing from some of your strongest key demographics, or the demographics that were supposed to break so overwhelmingly for you, and they broke at lower levels than they even did for crappy Hillary in 2016. Are you kidding me? That's no reason to celebrate. Instead of winning a massive, no-doubter electoral college victory, you won, but not by that much. That's nothing to celebrate. You had to run and eat your vegetables 77-year-old in order to win this. So you're going to be right back in the same damn spot again 4 years from now. That's no reason to celebrate. For all the things that Donald Trump has said that suggests that he's racist and misogynist and everything else, it's Joe Biden that has a legislative history that indicates he actually supports those policies that liberals and Democrats want to sit there and pretend that they're against. That's no reason to celebrate. You couldn't even get to a damn majority in the Senate. That's no reason to celebrate. You lost seats in the freaking House. That's no reason to celebrate. Other than the fact that you're just happy that Trump is out of the White House in a couple of months, there is absolutely nothing to celebrate here because all of the problems remain and all of the incompetence of the Democratic leadership is especially remaining.